Phuoc Tuy Province, 1968. The jungle didn't echo, it absorbed sound. That made it worse. A Navy SEAL recon team, callsign _0_, had been operating deep within NVA-controlled territory for 48 hours. It was meant to be a textbook hit-and-fade operation. Insert quietly. Observe enemy movement along the Hatditch corridor, and exfil under the canopy before anyone knew they were there. But something went wrong. A Claymore tripwire, possibly left by a retreating VC unit weeks ago, took out their rear scout. The explosion wasn't fatal, but it was loud enough to change everything. Within minutes, the jungle lit up with movement. Radio intercepts hinted the NVA had triangulated their location. By 1500 hours, they were boxed in. Small arms fire coming from 3 directions and no viable exit route. Worse, the monsoon had rolled in early. Visibility dropped to 0. Air support was impossible. The dense triple canopy jungle turned into a claustrophobic cage with no sky, no light, and no help. They were 5 men. 1 wounded, 2 with only a single full magazine left. And the NVA wasn't probing anymore. They were preparing to crush. Lieutenant Dan Kessler, the SEAL team leader, took stock. They had to hold through the night. No extraction, no flares, just perimeter claymores, discipline, and darkness. They were used to being the hunters, but now they were being stalked, slowly, methodically, like someone circling wounded prey. Quote 1, whispered Petty Officer Cruz, reloading behind a twisted tree root. Kessler didn't reply. Because for once, he wasn't sure either. A distant burst of AK fire crackled to the west. Then silence. The kind of silence that pressed against your ribs. Then came the low, deliberate crack of a suppressed rifle. Not an M16. Not an AK. Something else. Something that didn't belong to either side. They weren't green. Shadow 6 was composed of men who had already been through fire more than once. Lieutenant Dan Kessler had led over a dozen direct-action raids across the Mekong Delta. He spoke fluent Vietnamese, could read terrain like a map, and had a reputation for moving faster than most teams could think. His men called him Quote 2, not because he lacked emotion, but because under fire, he never blinked. Petty Officer First Class Miguel Cruz was his second, a wiry Puerto Rican from Brooklyn who had learned early how to disappear in alleys before doing it in the jungle. Cruz was their close-quarters expert, deadly with an M3 grease gun, and even deadlier with a KABAR, when silence was the order. Hospital Corpsman Riley had the kind of hands that didn't shake even under the worst pressure. He'd once kept a teammate alive with a pen tube, a plastic bag, and 2 rubber bands. Jungle medicine was a losing game, but Riley never lost a man without a fight. The remaining 2 were specialists Carlson and Henley, newer, younger, but tough. The kind of men who didn't ask questions when it was time to move, shoot, or bleed. But the SEALs weren't meant for static defense. Their tactics were surgical. Insert fast, hit precise, disappear into water or bush. Ambush, extraction, sabotage. These were their rhythms. Not holding a shrinking perimeter for 18 hours with no support, no light, and an enemy that kept pressing closer in patient silence. Worse, the jungle wasn't forgiving. Triple canopy meant no sun, no stars. Moisture coated every surface, rusting weapons, fogging optics, soaking boots until skin peeled. The air felt like it had weight. Radio signals barely held through the foliage, and the only things louder than gunfire were the insects screaming through the heat. But this wasn't their first nightmare. They'd been hunted before by VC trackers with dogs, by NVA snipers hiding in trees. This time just felt different. Cruz whispered it at 0210 hours. They're not rushing. They're not probing. They're waiting. Kessler nodded. Which means they're confident. The perimeter claymores stayed untouched. That was the sign. The NVA weren't desperate. They were circling. Riley tended to Carlson's leg. A shrapnel wound, slowly swelling. No infection yet. But time was slipping. And with time, morale. The men weren't panicked, but they weren't hopeful either. Then came that second suppressed shot. Crisp, distant, followed by a soft thud. A body, not a tree. Cruz looked at Kessler. "That's not ours." Kessler stared into the dark. He wasn't sure what was out there, but whatever it was, it had just shot an NVA, and it didn't want to be seen. Roughly 2 clicks to the west, deep in the twisted underbrush of Phuoc Toi Province, a 5-man Australian SAS patrol was already watching the jungle breathe. They had inserted 3 nights earlier under cover of darkness, using a stealth LZ known only to them and one RAF pilot who'd trained with them in Borneo. The mission was simple in words, impossible in practice. Locate a suspected NVA logistics trail feeding into the Hat Ditch corridor, map movement, and disappear. Sergeant Mick Blue Rowden led the patrol, a veteran of Borneo and a man who treated every leaf like it might scream. He didn't talk much, just pointed, waited, and moved like mist. Corporal Payne was the team's lead scout, a tracker so skilled he could tell if the man who left a footprint was tired, limping, or carrying extra weight. He'd once trailed VC through a typhoon without losing the scent. They said he could follow shadows. Signalman Terry Sparks. Henderson kept comms tight, low power bursts only at dawn and dusk. His set had been modified with field-expedient filters, tuned to avoid enemy triangulation. He hadn't transmitted in 36 hours per protocol. But he was listening. And what he heard just before dawn wasn't jungle. Encrypted bursts, faint but clear. American. Someone on an emergency frequency. Short range, panicked rhythm. No location given, but enough to know someone was in deep trouble. Rowden signaled halt. The patrol sank into the foliage. Invisible. They didn't move fast. They didn't need to. SAS doctrine wasn't about running to save the day. It was about reading the land until it told you everything. Payne found the trail first. Faint boot prints moving east, then doubling back erratically. Not NVA, not locals. American combat boots. Small group. Likely recon. Then came something else. NVA tracks shadowing them. Multiple pairs. Heavy spacing, encirclement pattern. The SEALs weren't just being followed, they were being herded. Rowden laid out the map. If the Americans kept moving east, they'd be backed into a narrow gully surrounded by high vegetation, a classic kill zone. Textbook NVA ambush. And they were already halfway there. No one said a word. Rowden tapped his suppressed M16, then pointed northeast. Payne smiled. Quote, by 0430, they were in position, watching the ambushers prepare to pounce. The Australians didn't speak, didn't breathe. They simply waited for the moment when the jungle whispered back. Then Rowden raised his rifle and fired one shot. And everything changed. The NVA platoon commander crouched low beneath a twisted vine, scanning the tree line. His men were in position, 30 fighters forming a wide crescent aimed at the gully where the American SEALs were pinned. They had maneuvered flawlessly, tracking boot prints and shell casings, always staying just far enough back to avoid alerting the prey. He expected contact within the hour. But then, one of his flank scouts didn't report in. It was subtle. No calls, just silence. A ripple in the routine. Then another man vanished. No shots, no cries. Just 2 men gone, as if the jungle itself had consumed them. He ordered a sweep. 5 soldiers moved into the western edge of their formation to investigate. Only 3 returned, visibly shaken. One of them was bleeding from a gash across his shoulder. He stammered something about foreign soldiers, but couldn't describe what he saw. His rifle was missing. His hands trembled. The commander didn't understand it yet, but his hunters were no longer the only predators in the forest. Meanwhile, up on a low ridge cloaked in bamboo and mist, Sergeant Rowden motioned silently. 2 fingers, then a quick point left. Smoky Payne vanished into the green. He was already gone before the leaves finished swaying. Below them, the NVA crescent was beginning to collapse inward, but their formation now had a hole. A blind spot just wide enough for phantoms to slip through. The Australians weren't trying to rescue the SEALs directly, not yet. That would risk detection, compromise the entire advantage. No, what they were doing was more precise, more unnerving. They were taking pieces out of the NVA formation like a surgeon removing tumors, quietly, cleanly, with no warning. A suppressed shot here. A tripwire shifted just slightly so the enemy would walk into their own traps. Claymores re-angled. Movement sounds mimicked on the opposite flank to draw attention away from where they really were. It was jungle sabotage. Psychological warfare at 2 meters distance. By 0630, the NVA commander was beginning to sense it, an unseen presence stalking them. His men whispered nervously. They were supposed to be hunting Americans, but now someone was hunting them. Something that didn't make noise, didn't leave prints, and didn't follow the rules. One soldier found a trail of blood leading into a thicket and followed it. He never came out. The commander ordered a halt. His perimeter began to tighten around the gully. Faster now, more desperate. If they could crush the SEALs before this invisible threat unraveled them, the mission might still succeed. But high above, in the tree line, Roden checked his watch. He gave a nod. It was almost time. The NVA's left flank exploded in a burst of green fire and shrapnel. 6 claymore mines, rigged in a tight arc, detonated by hand from a ridge just 20 meters away. The blast cut through the trees like a machete through canvas. Screams followed, then silence again. Roden gave one sharp whistle through his teeth, barely audible, but enough. Smoky Payne fired 2 suppressed rounds in rapid succession, both striking NVA radio men trying to re-establish contact on the southern edge. Sparks Henderson transmitted one word over the comms. Quote, 12, quote. It was the signal the SEALs had been waiting for. Pinned in a sunken patch of ground choked with bamboo and thornbush, the 6 Navy SEALs had been trading sporadic fire with NVA forward scouts all night. Ammunition was running low, no medevac, no artillery. Just a hope that someone, anyone, had heard their earlier transmission. When the claymores hit, it was as if the jungle itself had opened fire. Lieutenant Tom Ramirez, the SEAL team leader, instantly recognized the tactic. That wasn't American doctrine. That was ghost work, Australian. He didn't waste time. Quote 14. The SEALs broke cover with calculated violence. 2 grenades forward, then bounding overwatch through the gully, suppressing fire tight and controlled. They weren't retreating, they were pivoting. The NVA, caught between 2 jaws of a trap they didn't know existed, broke formation. Some fired wildly into the trees. Others dropped to the ground, unsure where the threat was coming from. Their commander tried to regroup, shouting orders, but his voice was lost in the chaos. He had never trained for this, an enemy they couldn't see, who struck without warning and disappeared without a trace. Up on the ridge, Rowden's patrol advanced with glacial precision. They weren't going to join the SEALs yet. They were shaping the battlefield. Payne dropped another enemy through the scope of his M16, single shot, center mass, no wasted movement. Henderson tracked NVA radio chatter with practiced ears, noting which frequencies went dead. Below, the SEALs punched through the collapsing edge of the NVA ambush net. One of them took a round to the shoulder. Another, Doc Lacey, dragged him into cover and applied a field dressing under fire without saying a word. Then came the moment that changed everything. 2 NVA squads tried to regroup near a fallen log trench where the Australians had rigged another surprise. A line of daisy-chained claymores triggered simultaneously, followed by 5 seconds of precision SAS rifle fire. When it ended, there was no counterfire. Just the smell of cordite and jungle silence again. The NVA survivors scattered. For the first time since dawn, the enemy wasn't hunting. They were running. By 0730, the NVA formation was no longer an organized force. It was a splintered mass of scattered men, some dragging wounded, others moving in chaotic directions. Their commander had been seen crawling into a ravine after the second claymore detonation. Whether he was alive or dead didn't matter. The trap was already closing. SEAL Lieutenant Tex Ramirez knew the window was open, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. The jungle had a rhythm, and NVA reinforcements could arrive within the hour if any transmissions got through. He keyed his handset, low on battery, and gave the signal. Quote, 16. It wasn't standard code, but the Australians understood it. Sergeant Rowden gave a single nod. Sparks. Henderson adjusted the directional antenna and clicked his mic. Hawk confirmed, covering shadow. While the SEALs moved out, injured man supported between two teammates, the SAS patrol shifted laterally. Their mission had evolved from disruption to exfil support. Smokey Payne and Tom Dog Lawton set a new ambush point 200 meters behind the SEALs' projected path. Nothing fancy. Just mines in the right place, rifles sighted on likely pursuit lines, and silence so deep it could freeze a heartbeat. The jungle began to fold inward again. Vines hung still. The birds returned. But the SAS didn't. They moved like part of the undergrowth. The SEALs were hurting, low on ammo, one man bleeding out, another limping from a fall. But they moved fast. Ramirez trusted that whoever was out there had their backs, even if he'd never seen them. One of his men muttered. He wasn't far off. At 0802, the 1st NVA Rearguard unit attempted pursuit. A squad of 8 men, still shaken but determined, followed the broken trail through the underbrush. They never saw what hit them. 6 explosions in sequence, echoing like distant thunder. A final shot rang out, sharp and precise. Payne again, finishing the last man cleanly. By the time the SEALs reached the LZ, a clearing barely large enough for a Huey, the sun was punching shafts of light through the canopy. The whoop-whoop of rotors signaled salvation. Dust kicked up. Ramirez waved green smoke. Behind him, 3 of his men held defensive positions. The wounded were already being lifted. As the last SEAL climbed aboard, he turned to look back toward the tree line. He saw nothing, just leaves, shadow, and silence. But deep in that jungle, the SAS patrol watched, unmoving, invisible, mission complete. They didn't board the Huey. They melted back into the green, because their job wasn't rescue. It was the hunt. When the Huey touched down at the forward operations base, the Navy SEALs looked like they'd clawed their way out of a nightmare. Mud-caked, bleeding, running on adrenaline and silence. Medics rushed in. The wounded were taken first. But as the stretcher passed through the triage tent, Lieutenant Tex Ramirez wasn't thinking about blood loss. He was thinking about the ghosts. The after-action debrief began that evening in a corrugated iron briefing room lit by a single dangling bulb. An American intelligence officer, clipboard in hand, asked the first question. "How did you break contact?" Ramirez leaned forward. "We didn't," he said. "The Australians did." It wasn't long before a liaison from the Australian SAS squadron arrived. Captain Jim, quote, 24. Warren. He looked more like a cattle rancher than a commando. Dusty boots, calm eyes, no rank insignia visible. He didn't introduce himself with a title. Just said, "Glad your boys made it out. Let's talk through what you saw." The SEALs had questions, of course. Who set the claymores? How long had they been tracking the NVA unit? How the hell did they move so close without being heard? Warren answered some. Others, he let hang. "We were operating north of your last known position," he said. "Heard your contact report. Decided to shadow the engagement. Laid a few surprises." Ramirez nodded slowly. "You saved our lives." Warren didn't smile. Quote 29. Still, there was mutual respect now. An unspoken bond between the two teams forged not through doctrine, but through shared experience in the green crucible of Vietnam. One SEAL, Doc Lacey, put it best. Quote 30. The Australians didn't operate like the SEALs. They didn't rely on firepower or brute movement. They relied on absence, on being unseen, unheard, untraceable. Their war was fought in whispers and footprints, not explosions and skirmish lines. What the SEALs learned during that debrief would change the way some of them fought. They began to request joint operations. A few even asked to train with the Australians. And in time, some of those requests were approved. The lesson was clear. In a war where overwhelming force often failed to pin down a fluid enemy, precision, patience, and silence had real power. The kind of power that came from years of jungle tracking in Malaya and Borneo. From 5-man patrols moving where even birds didn't stir. The SEALs had seen what that looked like. They'd felt it move beside them in the shadows. They'd been saved by it. And they would never forget it. The SEALs flew out. The Australians melted back in. Officially, it was a minor engagement. A brief contact. No friendly KIA. Friendly. One NVA company disrupted. One extraction completed. But inside the tightly knit world of special operations, that February rescue rippled far wider than any body count. Within weeks, informal briefings began circulating among American Special Forces groups operating out of Da Nang, Nha Trang, and Phu Bai. The Aussies pulled ghosts out of the jungle, one SEAL wrote in his after-action memo. Didn't speak, didn't show, just struck like wind through trees. U.S. commanders began asking harder questions. How did 5 Australians track an enemy formation without detection? How did they set up an ambush and exfil plan without a single radio call? How did they know the SEALs were in trouble before even the brass did? The answer wasn't in the gear. It wasn't even in the tactics. It was in the doctrine. A mindset the Australian SAS had refined over years in Borneo and Malaya. Don't dominate the jungle. Disappear into it. American Special Forces units had trained for covert operations, yes. But many still defaulted to aggressive recon, probing with firepower and movement. The Australian SAS had shown a different kind of violence. Deliberate, precision-timed, almost surgical in effect. No sound, no signature, just impact. That rescue became an unofficial case study in Fort Bragg and even in Coronado years later. SEAL instructors began integrating segments of Australian doctrine into jungle warfare modules. Tracking techniques, counter-tracking, low-signature patrolling, even the psychological value of never being seen. Some American operators, like Lieutenant Ramirez, pushed for joint training programs. A handful were approved. And in those rare, quiet sessions deep in Vietnamese provinces, American SEALs and Australian SAS soldiers shared fire pits, trail signs, and stories they'd never put on record. But perhaps the most lasting legacy came from the enemy. Captured NVA documents months later revealed a change in tone. The Australian Black Berets are not like other foreign units, one field report read. They observe for days. They strike only when unseen. Do not underestimate them. That fear, the psychological disruption, was the goal. For the Australian SAS, the operation was just another tick on a blurred patrol log. No medals were requested. No official commendation submitted. The SEALs later tried to nominate the patrol for an American unit citation. The Australians quietly declined. The jungle didn't need paperwork. Back in Nui Dat, the SAS men cleaned their rifles, burned their garbage, and prepped for the next insertion. New orders had come in. Another unit was going out, and someone had to map enemy routes north of the horseshoe. Same jungle. Same silence. But somewhere in that silence now was the echo of a rescue, one that changed how shadows moved and how future wars would be fought.